Now moving to management issues, and I'm going to start with a definition of airline management. So we can say that it's the process whereby individual and groups of airlines seek to organize, direct and harness the resources, personnel and business activities in order to meet the needs of their organization and customers in an effective and efficient manner. So the idea is to put things together, organize, direct and harness. What are they doing? The idea is to do so in order to maximize the benefits for the organization, for the customers, and essentially the idea is to put together resources, personnel and business activities towards that direction. Now, in terms of airline management, it's always necessary and useful to distinguish in a number of different functions we have. So first of all, we're talking about planning. So the idea is to have the longer term objectives and goals, and also to design appropriate policies, procedures, and the so-called SOPs, the standard operating procedures and rules in the industry. Then it's about organization. So what we have to do here is to assign and supervise work. So different people should be assigned specific roles. There should be a coherent and clear job descriptions. People should know what they are supposed to do, and jobs should be classified accordingly, and we should also have a good level of management information. When it's about staffing and directing, team spirit is of primary importance here. Inspiration and leadership and team building is also very important in order to create a team spirit. And again, it's about going back and see whether things work according to what we originally planned. So it's about controlling. So all different airlines should use the so-called benchmark exercise, meaning compare each other in terms of cost structure, in terms of revenue structures, overall performance and so on. It's about performance standards, taking corrective actions if needed, and so on. Now, in terms of the management, the airline management, we can also distinguish in terms of different levels. So at the top of the hierarchy, we have a board of directors. We usually have a CEO, chief executive officer, a chief policy making body, and they're usually in charge of strategic decisions like the dividend policy or the appointment of senior executives. Then we have the top management, which makes the various policies, and the middle management, which undertakes plans in order to carry out the policies designed by the top management. And then we have the operating management, which all it does is to see whether the work is according to plan. So the idea is that at strategic level, the top management decides the policies, and when the middle management carries out plans to make these policies operative, and then the operating management is down to earth, if you like, following a hands-on approach to see how to actually implement the whole thing. Okay, so this could be, let's say, related to tactical day-to-day operations. This would be at a more strategic level. So if we're to talk about functions and the levels of the hierarchy, all this is related to decision making, very much related to the whole concept of management. So whenever we have a problem in an airline, let's say we end up having a very poor record of profitability, we have to recognize the causes behind the problem. So the first important thing is to recognize the problem. And you might say, well, it's easy to recognize the problem. The answer is it's not always easy to recognize what is the cause of the problem. Okay? So, for example, if I have a headache, okay, I know what my problem is that I have a headache, but the most important thing in order to solve the problem is to find the cause of my headache. Okay? So recognition of the problem and the causes behind the problem are of primary importance. So let's say that I found out that I have a poor level of profitability. Now the cause might be, for example, that I'm in a deep recession. So in that case, there's not much I can do in terms of revenues, but I might have to do something in terms of more cost structure. Or it might be, for example, the case of having very poor customer satisfaction. So in that case, I might have to look more into the marketing, improving the customer relationship and so on. So recognition of a problem, very important, then try to break it into essential parts in order to be able to focus in a better way. Try to establish specific solutions for each of the essential parts, so solutions to specific causes of a problem. And then the idea is try to select the best solution. So what I have to do is I have alternative solutions established. I compare among them and try to select the one which matches my profile and suits my needs in a better way. And then the idea is to go out, adopt, implement the strategy, and then go back and see whether it has worked or not. So decision-making process, okay, it sounds easy, but in reality it can be very complicated. The idea always is to be quite focused, understand what the causes of the problems are, try to find alternative solutions, and select the one which seems to be the best one. Now, also in terms of organization, I talked to you earlier about this hierarchical approach that we have in terms of board of directors, top management, middle management, operating management, and so on. Another distinction we can make is between life and staff personnel. So we usually talk about line departments. So these are very much related to the actual activities, flight activities of an airline. So flight operations or engineering, maintenance, marketing and services, they're usually under line departments. And then we have staff departments, which are very much related to the functioning of an airline as a company, as a generic kind of company. So these are very much related to the actual activity of the airline, whereas these are related to more generic functions, like IT or finance or planning, community relations, CSR, corporate social responsibility, publicity, issues related to human resources, pensions, medical issues, legal issues, and so on. So distinction here is between line and staff departments, and also we can use the same kind of approach when we talk about airports. So again, whether we talk about airlines or airports, again the idea is that we would need some proper planning. We would have to find solutions to our problems, implement solutions, find the best one, and so on. Now, so when we talk about airports, again, it's a matter of identifying specific activities which could be related to operational services, facilities. Also, it's about traffic handling services. Obviously, that's a very important activity for an airport, meaning the airports are there to facilitate airlines. But especially in Europe, and I've seen that here in Australia it's also the case, commercial activities are becoming increasingly important in an airport. So duty-frees, for example, or concessions, and all these things are related to commercial activities that take place within an airport or close to an airport. They are not related to the primary activity, which is traffic handling, but increasingly all these commercial activities also become very important. And major issue in terms of airports, and it's been an issue for airlines in the past, now it's not so much the case, it's about ownership and management. So in many cases, airports are still under state ownership with direct government control, whereas in other cases, the states or the local governments have set up specific airport authorities. But still, airports might be under public ownership in that case. Then we might have a so-called hybrid model, which brings together what we call a public and private partnership, the PPP. So you might have a mixed public and private ownership, or we might have a completely private airport. So all four different models are applicable in the contemporary business environment. In many cases around the world, I would say that the trend is to move more into private ownership or into a mixed hybrid models of private-public partnerships. But again, what is important to remember is that all these different things are also interrelated to the level of activity. So especially if we're talking about private airports, airports are there to make money. So they're trying to maximize the revenue not only out of traffic handling services, but also by implementing commercial activities. And it's quite interesting. So was the second time I visited Australia. First one was back in 2003, was 8 years ago. So when I visited Sydney Airport in order to fly from Sydney here to Gold Coast, I was really amazed by the number of duty-frees in the airport, and much higher number compared to what I saw back in 2003, which means that Sydney Airport is actually investing very heavily into improving its commercial revenue and into raising its profile as a kind of airport mall, if you like. Whereas back in 2003, okay, there were still duty-frees around, but it was not as prominent as today. And it's the same case in Europe. If you go to big airports like Munich or London, Heathrow or Charles de Gaulle, you'll see lots of outlets there. So European airports are also very much into this commercialization. That's not so much the case for US airports, but it's also changing. So generally the idea is that we live in a highly competitive environment, and in most cases airports are gradually moving more into the private sector, so commercialization is also going to be important here. So when we want to make a breakdown in terms of costs and revenues, major items here in terms of airport costs are need to pay for staff, need to pay for capital, also maintenance, administration, other operation items, and in terms of revenues can be related directly to traffic activities, what I told you earlier. That's the so-called aeronautical revenues. So they get money from landing fees or aircraft parking, but then increasingly commercialization becomes very important. So non-aeronautical revenues like rents or concession income from duty-frees and so on. And this is also very much related to the distinction between the traditional airport, which depends very heavily on aeronautical rather than non-aeronautical revenues. And then we have the commercial airport model, where non-aeronautical revenue is of primary importance. So now for airports like Munich or London Heathrow and so on, more than 50% of the revenues is derived from non-aeronautical sources. So that's quite important. And what are the airport customers? We can make a distinction between trade. So first of all, we have airlines, so we might have people related to cargo, like freight forwarders or general aviation, the small aircraft. And then we have people like tour operators and travel agents. Then we have passengers who either fly for business and leisure. And we talked earlier about the distinction between scheduled, traditional, low cost. Could be a charter passenger, or it could be transfer passengers as well. So, for example, airports like Dubai or Singapore, they are very much dependent on transit passengers or transfer passengers. But that's business for the airport as well, because especially if you follow a commercial airport model and if you are full with duty-free shops and so on, transit passengers can be of great importance to you. And then there are other customers like, employees, tenants, concessionaries. So even if I work at the airport, I might wish to buy clothes from there, or, buy some chocolate or whiskey or whatever, provided, of course, that the airport follows this commercial model. And then we have visitors, local residents, and businesses. So all these customers are potentially important for the airport. Now, obviously, an airport cannot exist without an airline. An airline cannot exist without an airport. So there is a structural relationship here. To some extent, we can say that the airport is at a disadvantage compared to an airline, because the airline has the flexibility to move its aircraft elsewhere, whereas the problem with the airport is that it's spatial fixed. It's a sunk cost. You cannot put the airport on wheels and take it elsewhere. So from this perspective, just because it's a matter of infrastructure, we say that Airports are, in some cases, riskier investments. However, if we look in terms of profitability, usually airport profitability is much higher compared to airline profitability. That depends, of course, on the type of airport, whether it's a big one or small one, a hub airport, as we say, or just a small regional airport, and so on. So that was a bit about management, and let me finish with lecture with marketing. So just some major principles of airline marketing and transport marketing in general. Now, what I have here are the so-called 4 stages of airline marketing. I don't know, have you ever had any lectures on marketing before? Okay, so I assume that you are aware with some of these concepts here. So first thing here is to identify markets and market segments that can be served profitably. So what you have to do is your homework. You have to find, what are the appropriate segments for you, undertake some statistical analysis, do some customer surveys, do some breakdowns in terms of the leisure, business market. So, market segmentation is very important in marketing. Also do an analysis of your competitors, if there are any, and then decide on the specific type of airline product and the pricing policy, the fare type that you want to use. So again, what you have to do here is examine the current and expected features of the competing airlines, see how many seats are offered in every class, see what is required by carriers, see what other competitors are doing in terms of different product features. Then as soon as you decide what you want to do, you go out and you implement. So you plan and organize your sales on the basis of a specific marketing plan. So you might either decide, for example, to go direct, okay, so you might wish to follow online sales on the internet, or you might wish to collaborate with trade in terms of travel agents or online travel agents. And again, you can use different commercial strategies like promotions or advertising on newspapers and so on. And as soon as you have done all this, the idea is to go back, review your strategy, monitor, and make sure that you've done a right job. Otherwise, if you find out that your strategy has not been successful, you might have to revise it and take any corrective action that might be needed. So what you have to do here is to make sure that your results are consistent. You have to undertake customer surveys, try to monitor your weekly or your monthly sales figures, analyze your complaints and make sure that you respond to any client complaints, use any other market research techniques available, and so on. So this 4-stage reviewing and monitoring is very important because we live in a highly competitive environment. So speed of change in the environment is accelerating, and identifying forces that affect marketing is very important. Again, we have lots of competitors, and we should be able to take advantage of any possible opportunity in this context. Again, we have to provide a framework in order to revise our marketing strategy if needed. And just because things change all the time, we should remember that what is successful today is not going to be successful forever. So we have to, be able to get some feedback and corrective action in order to redesign our strategy and make it more successful in the future. Now, all these things bring us now into some other considerations that should also be taken into account. So social and cultural environmental considerations for airlines are very important. And I'm sure that you heard about, emissions trading schemes in industry and about the carbon footprint and so on. So as people become more environmentally friendly, this has important repercussions for the airline industry as well. So it's part of the modern marketing approach to make airlines appear as greener and as companies, but to take the environment into consideration. It's not only the environment, it's also social and cultural issues as well. So especially if we talk about airlines which are international businesses, they should be able to take into consideration the values and the perception and the preferences of a society in order to understand customer behavior in a better way. Okay, so for example, when we talk about multicultural societies where there is a greater ethnic mixing, it's very important to take this into account. So for example, an airline might wish to offer different types of dishes. So they might offer a standard dish or kosher, or they might offer halal meat or whatever, just to make sure that people with a different ethnic and cultural and religious background are able to enjoy the onboard service. Again, it's a matter of knowing how often people fly. So, for example, residents in developed countries usually, they're going to have breaks all year round, shorter breaks, but more numerous breaks compared to the past. Also, it's a matter of demographics. So, developed countries now have older populations compared to the past. According to some recent statistics, nearly half of holidays are now taken by people who are over 45 years old. We've seen an increase in single families. As a result, the role of children in the decision becomes more important, which means that the airline should also have a happy face towards small children, or about families as well. The fact that people are time pressured, work in stressful environments, means that the airline should make sure that it becomes very easy to book online. It doesn't take much time, but people can have a smooth process throughout the airport, reach the gate, to embark into the aircraft as soon as possible. We've seen an increase in the number of independent travelers, also a number of the so-called fly drive holidays. So fly drive, do you know what is a fly drive? Or a fly cruise, have you heard of that? Well, for example, if I live in Sydney, I might decide to have a holiday here in Gold Coast. So a fly drive holiday would mean that, let's say I would fly with Virgin Blue from Sydney to Gold Coast, and then I would rent a car here at Gold Coast Airport to go around. So the idea here would be to combine the fly product with the drive product. So as an airline, what I can do in order to maximize my profits is to have an affiliation with a rent-a-car company. So Virgin Blue, for example, they might end up having an affiliation with Hertz or with Avis. Likewise, Jetstar could do the same. The idea is try to give more services to your customer, keep them happy, and also be able to generate ancillary services for your part as well. Now, another interesting statistic, 60% of over 40s go on city breaks. Now, that's quite interesting, especially for low-cost carriers. In Europe, they are very much into this idea of short breaks, long weekends, and so on, especially to major cities. And also, more holidays are getting shorter, significant growth in visiting friends and relatives, trips. If you remember, for those of you who attended this morning lecture, guys from Gold Coast Tourism told us about the importance of VFR traffic here. And then it's about societal marketing concept, which means doing something good for the society. I'm sure you've heard the term CSR, corporate social responsibility. That's also very important for the airline industry, partly because it's usually accused of being aggressive and against the environment. That's why I told you earlier about becoming green. And it's also about giving something back to the community, because traditionally what we have in the airline industry is the called a NIMBY phenomenon. Have you heard of NIMBY? It's written like this. NIMBY. It's an acronym. Have you heard this acronym? It means not in my backyard. Okay? So everybody wants jails, so that the bad guys go to jail, but nobody wants to have a jail close to where they live, because they might consider it dangerous. Everybody wants to have airports because it's good for accessibility, but you don't want to have an airport close to where you live, because in that case that might generate noise or traffic congestion and so close to where you live. So that's always a problem with local communities, airlines and airports. And in the context of CSR, corporate social responsibility, the airline has to devise a marketing plan to do something. So, for example, in Britain, British Airports Authority, which is a major airport company dealing, among others, with Heathrow Airport, Gatwick, and so on, or British Airways, for example, they do take initiatives to improve the quality of life of local residents. So, for example, they've given money so that all local houses can install double glazed windows in order to reduce problems with noise, or they give monies to schools. Okay, the idea is to improve education for local communities and so on. So this can be very important for both airlines and airports, and it's part of what we call societal marketing concept.